Up to now, we've been using Chef as a standalone solution. This is not really how we want to use Chef. In the next lectures, we will add the Chef server. With the server, we can keep the state of our nodes. Your workstation is the computer from which you create your cookbooks and administer your network. Chef server acts as a central repository for your cookbooks as well as for information about every node it manages. A node is any computer that is managed by Chef server. By now, you should be a bit more familiar with Vagrant. This is the Vagrant file we're going to use. Chef recommends to have 4 GB of memory for your Chef server. So you see I added v.memory equals 4096 in the configuration file. Put this Vagrant file in a new project directory if you haven't created one earlier and start the machines using Vagrant up Chef and Vagrant up node. Then log in the machines using Vagrant SSH. Chef requires FQDNs, fully qualified domain names. We can fake those by adding them to etc hosts. You can echo IP address and then hostname and then short hostname into etc hosts to make sure that you can ping either Chef or chef.example.com and that the hostname will then resolve to the IP address. You have to do this 3 times, for every machine once. You can test this afterwards using ping hostname. Let's install Chef server. You need to download Chef server from chef.io first and move it to the Vagrant project folder. Then you can use dpkg-i to install Chef server core. The next step is to configure Chef server. It will use Chef to install Chef server on your machine. These commands can take some time. Optionally, you can install the web UI by entering these 3 commands. The web UI is currently only free if you're not going to have more than 25 nodes. We need to create an admin user and an organization. And we're going to use Chef server CTL to do that. The first line creates a new admin user with a first name, a last name, and an email address admin@example.com. It will use Learn DevOps as a password. You better choose a good password yourself when you install it. We're going to get a private key to log in, which we're going to store in admin.pem. The second line adds a new organization, Learn DevOps. The other argument you see is the argument in brackets, and it's a longer name. It just says Learn DevOps course. We're going to associate the user admin with this organization. We store then the private key in a file called org.pem. With the 2 created PEM files, you can now set up the workstation. You can use the workstation machine you created with Vagrant, or if you're low on resources, you can use the same machine where the server is installed. You can either create your own knife.rb or download the knife.rb from the web UI. To download it from the UI, you can go to the URL 192.168.0.253 on your host PC. There is a link administration where you can download the knife config. You can only do this if you installed the UI as well. Alternatively, you can build the knife config manually, which I'm going to show you next. Here's an overview of the knife.rb config. It includes the paths to our admin PEM and our org PEM, as well as the URL of the Chef server API. Make sure you copy the contents of the PEM files from the server to the workstation. You can also use the shared/vagrant folder to do this. Now it's time to test our configuration. First, fetch the SSL certificate from the Chef server using knife SSL fetch. Then try to get a list of the clients. If you don't get an error, everything worked well. You can see on the image on the right that we have our knife.rb file on our workstation in amber. The knife.rb is being read by knife to access the Chef server in blue. It uses the PEM files in dark gray to authenticate to the server. Next, we can bootstrap a new node. On the right, you see our workstation again in amber. On the workstation, we can use knife bootstrap to add our node to the Chef server, which is depicted in blue. We use knife bootstrap to bootstrap the node itself. The node is shown in purple. Bootstrap will install and run the Chef client on the node. This is what will happen when you execute the knife bootstrap node.example.com command. We also add -n to specify the node for the Chef server and -x to specify a user. Chef needs root access, so we add the sudo flag as well. To run a cookbook on the newly booted up machine, you first need to upload the cookbook to the Chef server. On the right, you see the diagram again. My Cookbook is the name of our first cookbook that contains the next generation engine recipe. It's depicted in dark gray. Using Knife, the cookbook is going to be uploaded to the Chef server. The Knife cookbook upload command will do that for us. If you haven't used Burksfile earlier to download the dependencies, you can still download them manually using Knife cookbook site download. Once you have all dependencies downloaded, you can upload the apt cookbook and the My Cookbook cookbook. The reason we also need apt is because My Cookbook depends on the apt cookbook. Now let's add our new cookbook to the node's run list. You can execute Knife node run list set to set a cookbook that needs to be executed by the Chef client on the node. Chef client runs periodically, by default every 30 minutes, but let's force the run with Knife to have the cookbook installed immediately. The next command will execute Chef client on all our nodes. If you prefer, you can also manually log in and run Chef client. Make sure you run Chef client as root or with sudo, otherwise it will not work. Let's test. If everything went alright, Chef should have installed next generation engine and put a hello world in the web root directory. If you enter curl node or you go to the IP address in a browser, you will see hello world showing up. If that's not the case, have a look at the demo to see if you did everything alright, or ask a question on the message boards.